So I might imagine they would take me seriously that when I assure them today that if you cross us, our allies, or our partners, if you harm our citizens, if you continue to lie, cheat, and deceive, yes, there will indeed be hell to pay. If at any point we determine that the regime is expanding its enrichment activities, the United States stands ready to pursue a panoply of options, whatever may be necessary and appropriate, to ensure the regime bears serious consequences for this action.
You know, what are the other options at this point? I mean, people always bring up when Israel struck back in 1981, and you have to think that if we look at a map of where the reactors were and where we think they might be now, we have some nice graphics for you there. I mean, is it possible to do something like this? Could Israel act on its own? I mean, what are some of the other options out there?
No, I think Israel could easily do this and probably should have about 10 years ago. What worries me more than anything else is that Iran and North Korea have moved beyond their 20-year cooperation on ballistic missiles and are cooperating on the nuclear side of this, and that a fair amount of Iran's nuclear activities are buried under a mountain in North Korea. The Europeans, frankly, are not the biggest problem here. I think Russia and China are problems as well. They don't see Iran's nuclear capability as a problem for them. They see it as a problem for us. And I think they're going to continue to trade and assist Iran, whether this deal stays in place or not. I think it's delusional to think that Iran is going to adhere to this deal or another deal that might be put in place. They haven't been adhering to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which bars them from acquiring nuclear weapons for over 30 years. So why should we think that yet another piece of paper is going to make a difference?
No, and I don't think the Tooth Fairy is going to come help out either.
Truly an outlaw regime. We must put pressure on the regime to rein in its destruction and demand that Iran act like a normal country. Unfortunately, just last night, I was disturbed and indeed deeply disappointed to hear remaining parties in the deal announce they are setting up a special payment system to bypass U.S. sanctions. This is one of the most counterproductive measures imaginable for regional and global peace and security. By sustaining revenues to the regime, you are solidifying Iran's ranking as the #1 state sponsor of terror, enabling Iran's violent export of revolution, and making the regime even richer.
The Iranian regime exports violence, terror, and turmoil. It illicitly procures sensitive items to advance its ballistic missile program and proliferates these missiles all across the Middle East. The regime is the world's leading sponsor of terror and fuels conflict across the region and far beyond. A regime with this track record must never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon. For this reason, I announced earlier this year that the United States would withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. This horrible one-sided deal allowed Iran to continue its path towards a bomb and gave the regime a cash lifeline when they needed it the most. They were in big, big trouble. They needed cash. We gave it to them. In the years since the deal was signed, Iran's aggression only increased. The regime used new funds from the deal to support terrorism, build nuclear-capable missiles, and foment chaos. Following America's withdrawal, the United States began reimposing nuclear-related sanctions on Iran. All U.S. nuclear-related sanctions will be in full force by early November. They will be in full force. After that, the United States will pursue additional sanctions, tougher than ever before, to counter the entire range of Iran's malign conduct. Any individual or entity who fails to comply with these sanctions will face severe consequences. I ask all members of the Security Council to work with the United States to ensure the Iranian regime changes its behavior and never acquires a nuclear bomb. The corrupt dictatorship in Iran. Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction. They do not respect their neighbors or borders or the sovereign rights of nations. Instead, Iran's leaders plunder the nation's resources to enrich themselves and to spread mayhem across the Middle East and far beyond. The Iranian people are rightly outraged that their leaders have embezzled billions of dollars from Iran's treasury, seized valuable portions of the economy, and looted the people's religious endowments, all to line their own pockets and send their proxies to wage war. Not good. Iran's neighbors have paid a heavy toll for the region's agenda of aggression and expansion. That is why so many countries in the Middle East strongly supported my decision to withdraw the United States from the horrible 2015 Iran nuclear deal and reimpose nuclear sanctions. The Iran deal was a windfall for Iran's leaders. In the years since the deal was reached, Iran's military budget grew nearly 40%. The dictatorship used the funds to build nuclear-capable missiles, increase internal repression, finance terrorism, and fund havoc and slaughter in Syria and Yemen. The United States has launched a campaign of economic pressure to deny the regime the funds it needs to advance its bloody agenda. Last month, we began reimposing hard-hitting nuclear sanctions that have been lifted under the Iran deal. Additional sanctions will resume November 5th, and more will follow. And we are working with countries that import Iranian crude oil to cut their purchases substantially. We cannot allow the world's leading sponsor of terrorism to possess the planet's most dangerous weapons. We cannot allow a regime that chants death to America and that threatens Israel with annihilation to possess the means to deliver a nuclear warhead to any city on earth. Just can't do it.